Good day, my dear colleagues. My name is Токтанова Асель. I am a doctor of philosophy at Jitsu University named after Lyashin Sugurov. I have been working in the field of education for more than 18 years. During my scientific and pedagogical career, I have been researching issues of modern leadership strategies, self-assessment, self-management, and reflection in the education sector. This course is called Improving the Professional Competence of English Teacher. Next. So, the first module will be about regulatory and socio-educational. The main regulatory and legal acts regulating the activities of secondary education teachers. The goal of the course to comprehensively familiarize the audience with the main regulatory and legal documents regulating the professional activities of teachers, explain their content and main provisions, as well as reveal their significance in the educational process. Next, objectives. So, as follows, study the content of the main laws and regulatory documents regulating the activities of teachers, analyze the professional rights, duties, and restrictions on the activities of teachers. Explain the norms of pedagogical ethics, the salary system and incentive mechanisms. Familiarize with qualification requirements, mentoring conditions, and other rules related to professional status. Consider the work ordered to educational organizations and the duties of teachers. Analyze the requirements of state compulsory educational standards for content, learning load, and expected results. Explain the structure, goals, objectives, and planning features of model curricula. Master the procedure and forms of registration of mandatory documents maintained by teachers. Study the procedures for current, intermediate, and final assessment of students, and the principles for their implementation. Expected results of the course. Students master the main regulatory legal acts regulating the activities of teachers and understand their role in the educational process. Form a clear understanding of the rights, obligations, and restrictions established by law and are able to apply them in practice. Know the principles of pedagogical ethics, the remuneration system, types of incentives, and career growth opportunities. Master the qualification requirements and features of mentoring, as well as the legal aspects of the teaching profession. So, able to organize their professional activities on the basis of regulatory and legal documents. Master the basic rules for organizing the educational process in accordance with standards. Apply the requirements of state standards for content, workloads, and learning outcomes in practice. Analyze the structure of model curricula. Determine learning objectives and carry out long-term planning. Maintain mandatory pedagogical documents in paper and electronic format in accordance with the established procedure and forms. Master the procedure for conducting current, intermediate, and final certification. Apply the principles of academic integrity and differentiated learning in practice. Next slide. So the purpose of the course to provide participants with the comprehensive understanding of the main regulatory and legal documents governing the professional activities of educators, to explain their content and key provisions, and to reveal their significance in the educational process. So the objectives of the course as follows: study the content of the main laws and regulatory documents that govern the work of educators. Analyze the professional rights, duties, and restrictions in educators' activities. Explain the norms of pedagogical ethics, the remuneration system, and mechanisms for labor incentives. Become familiar with qualification requirements, conditions of mentorship, and other regulations related to professional status. Review the operational procedures of educational institutions and the responsibilities of educators. Analyze the requirements of state compulsory education standards regarding content, workloads, and expected learning outcomes. Clarify the structure, purpose, objectives, and specific features of planning in standard curricula. Master the procedures and formats for maintaining mandatory documentation carried out by educators. Study the procedures for conducting current, midterm, and final assessment of students, as well as the rules for their implementation. So expected outcomes are as follows. Upon completion, participants will possess knowledge of the main regulatory and legal acts governing the work of educators and understand their role in the educational process. Develop a clear understanding of the rights, duties, and restrictions established by legislation and be able to apply them in practice. Know the principles of pedagogical ethics, the remuneration system, types of incentives, and opportunities for career growth. Be familiar with qualification requirements, the specifics for mentorship, and the legal aspects of the teaching profession. Be able to organize their professional activities based on regulatory and legal documents. Possess key rules for organizing the educational process in accordance with standards. Apply in practice the requirements of state standards regarding content, workload, and learning outcomes. Be able to analyze the structure of standard curricula, define learning objectives, and carry out long-term planning. Maintain mandatory pedagogical documentation in paper and electronic formats in accordance with establishment procedures. Next slide. So, we are going to speak about the concept of integrated education now, how to integrate it into the learning process. So next slide will be about objective. Objective is to familiarize English language teachers with the content and principles of the concept of integrated education and to master the methods of effectively integrating educational values into language teaching. Today, there is a need to develop in students the values of national interest, honor, and demands that embody the ideological of the head of the state, Қасым-Жомарт Тоқаев, Әділетті Қазақстан, еңбек адамы, толық адам, адал адам, and determine moral and personal qualities. The task is to educate a deeply educated, forward-thinking, hardworking, honest, and clearly national identity person who has absorbed national values, values the national interest, values his native land, homeland, and gives impetus to the further development of a just Kazakhstan. A theoretical analysis of sources related to the development of national and spiritual and moral values in the younger generation was conducted. In this regard, a unified educational program has been developed. The program can be used to instill national values in the younger generation. During the study, of course, the following were taken into account. So, by Алып Ертонға, the wise men and Al-Farabi, Құтты білік, by Жүсіп Баласағұни, Құтты білік, by Яссауи, Толық адам, by Абай Құнанбаев, Ар-Ождайн, by Шәкәрім Құдайбердіұлы, Баулу School by Ахмет Байтұрсынов, and the works of other Kazakh educators. These works are prerequisite for the formation of responsibility for society and parents, a spirit of patriotism, and a sense of responsibility for the motherland in a student. Also, for the first time in the Kazakh language, the concept of education was defined and what it should be, which can be seen from the pedagogical heritage of Jusupbek Aymautov. He showed that education is a continuous process that continues throughout life and that education leads a person to the practical realization of truth, goodness, and art. And that is the foundation on which knowledge rests. Continuing this idea, Marjan Jumabayev also emphasized the importance of raising a child with the education of that nation, showing that a child can be fully developed only when he is given intelligence, character, beauty, and physical education. Next slide. Therefore, the common idea, common to Kazakh thinkers, poets, and intellectuals, is that only when child education is national, our nationhood will be strengthened and our independence will be solidified. National values are the main core of the national idea, one of the main factors in the formation of nation. The national idea is feeling formed by the influence of the homeland and the environment in which it was raised and systematized through the language, oral literature, customs, traditions, superstitions, and prohibitions of the people. It's the essence of the nation, its physiological identity, and its national ideology is weak. It will have a negative impact on all spheres. In each of these spheres, the head of state, Қасым-Жомарт Tokayev, attaches the great importance to the upbringing of the generation. In this speech, at the second session of the National Congress at Just Kazakhstan, an honest citizen, held in the Holy Land in Turkestan in 2023, he paid special attention to the upbringing of the generation. We must attach great importance to the upbringing of the generation and guide the youth to godliness. In today's internet era, this is not an easy task. Frankly speaking, now the young generation is being educated through social networks. If we don't direct the child in the right direction and show the way, this is a very dangerous process. There are also young people who have fallen prey to foreign religious movements through the internet. If a generation has bad habits, it's primarily the fault of the elders, he said. The integrated education program aims to promote the values of demand, honor, and demand. Values influence a person's life position, choices, decision-making, and attitudes and determine their actions. National values are the core of the national idea, one of the main factors in the formation of a nation. They are feeling formed from the influence from a homeland and the environment in which he grew up, and systematized through the language of the people. Oral literature, art, songs, poems, customs, traditions, superstitions, and other prohibitions. They allow us to understand the essence and physiological uniqueness of the nation. That is why the education of modern children and adolescents should be imbued with the national idea and integrated with modern knowledge. In order for the education to be effective, it must be measurable. That is, it's necessary to answer the question, what do we mean by education? Can we measure education through the child's behavior patterns? In general, education is the foundation of quality knowledge that leads the generation to higher ideals. It ensures the moral development of a person, energizes the soul with kindness and direct to godness. The problem of education has been continuously addressed in the teaching to Farabi's Parasatты Адам, Жүсіп Баласағұнның Құтты Білік, and Yassауи Hall Абай Құнанбаев's Толық Адам, Шәкәрім Құдайбердіұлы, Аруждан, and other works of the Kazakh people's educators. Next, the following concepts were used in the conceptual foundation of educations. Educational values, guidelines for creating a system of educational goals that serve as the basis for determining the content of education and are the leading factor in the formation of the personality of the learner. Extracurricular activities, a component of a single educational and educational process, a form of organizing the free time of learners. Education, a pedagogical target activity aimed at the harmonious development of the personality and the formation of its value orientation and moral norms of behavior. Educational activity, a type of practical pedagogical activity aimed at organizing the educational environment and managing the various actions of learners. The educational system, a single ecosystem created by the joint efforts of participants in the educational process on the basis of the value orientations of society. The educational process, the interaction of educational subject, during which positive changes in the qualities and characteristics of the personality of learners occur. Project work, practical and creative work of a student carried out under the guidance of a teacher or mentor. Comprehensive child development, the harmonious development of a child in physical, physiological, social, emotional terms in the safe and favorable environments. Constructivist approach, the creation of pedagogical conditions for the active, comprehensive, independent cognitive activity of the student. taking into account the cultural heritage of the Kazakh people, the needs of the modern generation, and the needs of society and the state at the current stage of development. This document defines the following basic values of education: health and well-being, deep knowledge, hard work and creativity, respect and cooperation, national heritage, patriotism and civil responsibility, honesty and prudence, kindness and care. These educational values should form the basis of the life of each educational organization and be a guide of determining the content, forms, and methods of the educational process. Thus, pedagogical integrity and continuity between all levels of education are ensured. For this, it's important to create a multi-level system of mutual obligation and responsibilities between all participants in the educational process. Instilling the values of health and well-being in students means educating them to lead a healthy lifestyle, encouraging them to engage in sports, physical activity, eat healthily, be emotionally alert, and have a positive outlook on life and the world. Next slide. Thank you for your attention.